All right, you guys, I am on Unit 6, Day 2. It says Worksheet 1 here, but I'm doing Unit 6, Day 2, the second day of the packet. I'm just going to kind of talk about briefly some of the things that we learned in class yesterday and then give you a chance to practice. So I'm going to skip all the way down to number 9 first. I'm going to skip around. Number 9 is the first one I want to do. Remember, when it's already factored like this and you have the equals 0 over here, that means you need to figure out what your two answers are. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to equal x minus 1 to 0, and I'm going to equal x minus 9 to 0. And these are the really quick, simple ones, okay? How do I get the x by itself? I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and that means my first answer is x equals 1. There we go. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. That means my second answer is x equals 9. Okay, remember we did a bunch of those in class yesterday, and you all were telling me that that seems pretty simple and pretty easy. If there are 3 things, then yes, you're going to have 3 answers. Equal this to 0, this to 0, this to 0. They're very simple. I'm going to go to the back page because these are the harder questions. So what we have to do is factor first. This is why this page is a little bit more difficult. You'll notice that these are not in parentheses. I can't set my stuff equal to 0 because I need it to be in factored form first. And there's a lot of different ways that we learned how to factor. If you have your note card from last chapter, get it out. It might help you. For number 15, let's see, I can't really do the x because I only have an x squared and a 9x term. I don't have a whole number. So remember, if I would try to do the x, what is the number that would go up here? I don't know, because I don't have a whole number, right? So that's kind of weird. So I guess maybe there's something called a GCF that I learned how to do. You might also be thinking, can you square root? But no, I don't want to do that because we have this x here. If it was just 9, yes, you could square root that, but you can't square root 9x. So that might be another thing you're thinking of, which unfortunately is also not an okay way to attack this problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to notice that this has 2 x's and this has 1. The smaller of those is 1x. And that means when I start with 2 x's and I take 1 out, I have 1 left. I'm going to keep the minus sign, and then it was 9x. I got rid of the x, so that means there's 9 left. Okay, now, cool, it is factored. Look, this is what I'm looking for. I'm trying to get everything as factored as I can. Now it's factored, and now I think I know how to solve this. I'm going to set this thing equal to 0. And yeah, there's nothing to actually solve, but that is one of my answers. Remember, if there's an x hanging out there, you can still set that equal to 0. And then this one, x minus 9 equals 0. This looks familiar to the one we did on the front. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And I'm going to end up with x equals 9 for my other answer. But I had to factor this thing first. And don't forget that there are sometimes these things called a GCF. Sometimes that will help you factor. Let me try this one. If you remember in class, what we wanted was there to be a 0 on one side. So that means everything needs to be on the other side. That means I need to minus this 3x over. It's positive, so to move it, it's going to become negative. This gives me 0. X squared minus 3x. I can't combine those. One's an x squared and one's a 3x, so I have to leave it like that. Now it looks a lot like this problem, except it's not a 9, it's a 3. So I still think that there's a GCF in this one, just like the one we did above. This has x squared, this has x. The smaller of those is x. When you take x away from x squared, you're left with 1x. Keep the minus. It was 3x. You got rid of the x. There's a 3. I have 2 answers now. X equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. X equals 3. Those are my 2 answers. Again, I'm going a little bit fast because I'm assuming you remember how to factor from last chapter. If you need to pause or if you need to ask a question, please do so. Let's look at 19. Again, I've got x squared on one side and I've got these 2 things on the other. I'm going to minus this x over, and I'm going to minus the 2. That cancels this and this, so I have a 0 on one side. You have to move everything over to one side so that you have a 0 before you can factor. Okay, here's an x squared, here's an x, here's a 2. I can't combine any of those, so I'm just going to write positive x squared, negative x, negative 2. Now, remember, what I need to do is I need to end up with something that's factored. So how do I factor this thing? I probably have to do this x thing, if you remember. Let's see, I'm taking my 1, my whole number here, and multiplying it by negative 2, and that's what goes in the top. And remember, this is a negative x. There's really a 1 there. If you want to put the 1 in there, you can, but that makes it a negative 1 in the bottom here. So I have to think what times what multiplies to negative 2 and adds up to negative 1. So the only factors of 2 are 2 and 1, right? But if they add up to negative 1, that means the negative 2 has to be negative. Remember, this times this equals this. Negative 2 plus 1 equals negative 1. So remember what I do next. I don't use this negative x. I split the middle, and I write negative 2x and negative 1x, and I'm going to keep the minus 2 equals 0, and I'm going to keep the x squared in front. Okay, now that we have 4 things, we're just grouping. You remember how to do this. So what can I take out of this first group? This is an x squared, this is an x. I can take out an x. The smaller of those is x. I'm left with x, keep the minus, and 2. Hey, my bad, I just realized that I have a typo. This is negative 2 and this is positive 1, so I should have split this into negative 2 and positive 1. My bad. Check that. Negative 2x, positive 1x. Negative 2, positive 1. That should be a positive. My bad. I'm not trying to confuse anybody. Anyways, but I'm trying to figure out if there's a GCF in this group, and there's not. There's no number that you can divide 1 and 2 by besides 1. So I'm going to put a plus 1 to hold the spot. And that means I still have my x and my negative 2. Okay, so remember when these two things match, that means the first part of your answer is x minus 2. And remember the second part of your answer is x plus 1. And you still have equals 0. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to rewrite what I have, so I just ran out of room. X minus 2, x plus 1 equals 0. I'm going to equal this to 0. And I'm going to equal this to 0. I told you in class that a lot of you eventually could probably do this part in your head, where you just add 2 to both sides and you get x equals 2 as one of your answers. And I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 1 for my other answer. Okay, I'm going to try and do one more. Since I'm kind of out of room for 21, maybe I'll go down to 23. This one looks interesting. Let's see, I've got my x squared here. I've got a 14 here, but I need to have this side to be 0. So I need to move over the 10x. And I need to move the plus 11. That cancels this and this, so I have 0. Okay, so now let's see. I only have one x squared term, so I can write that. I only have one x term. It's negative 10x, so I've got negative 10x. And now I have 2 whole numbers. I have positive 14 and positive 11. Yes, you can combine those. So that makes positive 25. Okay, I need to get this thing factored so that I can equal them both to 0. How do I get it factored? I probably have to do this x. I'm going to put the 25 on top and then negative 10 on the bottom, and you got to think of those two numbers. What times what is 25? I believe it's 5 and 5, but that doesn't add up to negative 10. So how about if we make them both negative? Perfect. Again, I'm going through that pretty quickly. That's what our test was over last week. I'm going to split that negative 10x into negative 5x and another negative 5x. And I'm going to keep the positive 25 equals 0, and I'm going to keep the x squared in front. Now I'm going to put parentheses, parentheses. The GCF in this first group is x. So I've got x minus 5. The GCF in this second group, it starts with a negative, so I'm going to take out the negative. And I believe I can divide 5 and 25 both by 5. So I'm going to write minus 5. That means I have x. Because of this minus, this sign switches. And yeah, remember they're supposed to match. 25 divided by 5 is 5. Okay, and because these two match, that's part of my answer. I'm going to write it over here, x minus 5. And remember, the other part of the answer is x minus 5. Wow, I have 2 of them. Okay, and don't forget that we're not finished yet. This is where we ended in the test last week. But this chapter we're doing equals 0. So that means I have to go one more step and I have to equal both of these to 0. That means I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and my answer is x equals 5. I could do this same exact thing for this. I would just have the answer x equals 5, so I'm not going to write it twice. The answer is x equals 5. Okay, thanks for watching, you guys. Keep working on the rest of the odds and get those checked for me, and I'll be around answering questions. Love you all.